Hello and welcome viewers, I am Pia and you're watching NewsX World's very special coverage of the SCO Summit 2025 that is taking place in Tianjin. It's drawn leaders from over 24 countries who are deliberating on key global issues. Chinese President Xi Jinping has addressed the Leaders Summit this morning, calling for stronger unity among member states amid global uncertainties. Xi Jinping has stated that the SCO has become a model of a new type of international relations, safeguarding regional security and turning borders into bonds of friendship as well as mutual trust. He has urged members to put into use the SCO Anti-Drug Center and has called for the early establishment of an SCO development bank. She has also emphasized enhancing a cooperation in energy, infrastructure, green technology and artificial intelligence while leveraging the organization's mega-sized market to improve trade and investment. We've also seen addresses by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. They've also provided their opening remarks at the summit. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Daniel Wagner. He is the CEO of Country Risk Solutions, joining us from Portland. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. We've seen some rather interesting visuals come in from Tianjin late last evening as well as early today morning. What do you make of the optics of this summit in particular? Because last evening, right after the dinner, before the family photo session, it seemed that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin were engaging in a rather intense and candid conversation. Xi, in fact, even called in his personal interpreter. And today as well, we've seen the leaders of out of 4 of the most powerful countries engaging in a conversation just before the Leaders Summit commenced. They were all smiles. So what signal is Xi Jinping trying to send to the West via this posturing?
Well, it seems very clear that what Xi would like to be able to do is turn the SCO from what has been historically an institution known for dialogue to more for action. And he's very opportunistic, of course, and he's taking great advantage of the fact that there is a rift between India and the United States at the moment, and he's trying to seize on that. I do find myself wondering, however, if the many border disputes between China and India since 1962 will all of a sudden be swept under the rug, and all of the simmering tensions between the two nations will be cast aside, and these two men will simply give a bear hug, wave a magic wand, and all will be forgotten. That seems unlikely to me. What seems likelier is that in the case of India, it will carefully weigh whether it makes sense to become a stronger member of the SCO or not. It's a fairly recent member, so it's been weighing its options for a number of years. But I think it's unrealistic for Xi to imagine that all he has to do is give a few bear hugs and say some nice words, and all of a sudden he's going to have an organization which is going to be transformed into something that it hasn't been since it was founded.
I'd also like to go across to Professor Joseph Gregory Mahoney. He's a professor of politics and international relations, joining us live from Beijing in China. During his opening address, Xi Jinping had highlighted the creation of an SCO development bank. Now, this is something that the Chinese have been eyeing for a very, very long period of time. So how does China eye using this, especially to further the Belt and Road Initiative? Xi Jinping did highlight that it's important to ensure that the world remains a multilateral order and that hegemony of any one particular bloc or one particular country is avoided.
Well, let me begin by saying I don't agree with the previous assessment. I don't think this is really President Xi thinking sort of naively. That's the last word I would use when I would describe the president of China. Naively thinking that he can just wave a magic wand and have thorny issues disappear from the past. I do think India's agreement, which some people mark as a tremendous concession, although I think we shouldn't overstate it, to at least form a study group to look at the early harvest proposal from China on the Sikkim border, does provide a way forward to perhaps start building mechanisms and building trust that would be used to resolve other issues, which is really the way China works. And I think it's the only way to move forward. And I think India at this point feels more confident with its position on the border, with its own military buildup, that it feels like it can move forward with those types of developments. Nevertheless, there is sort of a dialectical approach. We do see improvements in bilateral ties moving hand in hand with improvements in multilateral ties. I think everyone is aware that sooner or later we're going to have some sort of crisis with the dollar. We may have already passed or entered that moment. I don't believe that we're looking at a situation, as some experts contend, that we'll see a slow decline of the dollar over a long period of time. I'm inclined to believe that we will continue to see a slow decline, but then we'll reach a tipping point where possible cascade events are possible. Now, China, I think, and more than any other country other than the United States, is sustaining the dollar in so much as China wants to continue to trade. Most of its trade is still conducted in dollars, and they don't want the disruptions of having to move off that currency. But at the same time, I think everyone realizes that the U.S. may trigger something. We might see the U.S. Going off the rails and attacking Hong Kong, Hong Kong's exceptional status, or some other issue. We may see the U.S. Weaponizing its relative control over the global financial system, and then I think we will see China moving along with Russia and other countries that are much more ready than China is to move past the dollar. So when we talk about maybe an SCO bank or a BRICS bank or these sorts of things, what we see is China encouraging sort of the strategic foundation building for crises that come down the road. And that's where China excels, is long-term strategic planning. I don't think they're ready to pull that trigger, but I do think they would like to see more cross-border trade in local currencies.
Since you've addressed de-dollarization, Professor Mahoney, I'd like to take that point forward with Mr. Wagner as well. Speaking of de-dollarization, there was an idea that's been floating around for quite a while, an idea of a BRICS currency. We've recently seen statements made by Vladimir Putin as well as the Brazilian President Lula da Silva calling to strengthen the BRICS as well. In fact, President Lula called for an extraordinary summit of the BRICS. The Indian Prime Minister, who is in Tianjin meanwhile, has extended an invite to the Chinese President to come to India next year for the BRICS summit, as India will be hosting it. It's going to be holding the presidency. Amid all of this, what's perhaps most interesting is that there was a phone call that was held a while back between the French President Emmanuel Macron and Narendra Modi. India had supported France and expressed that it will back France during the G7 presidency next year, while France, interestingly, which is a NATO ally, has stated that it will back India's presidency of the BRICS. So where do you see the BRICS headed next?
Well, let me just say briefly that I don't believe that something like the de-dollarization of the global economy is going to happen anytime soon, and probably not for a very, very long time, if it happens at all. Most people in the world, most businesses, most governments, they don't want to hold BRICS currencies. They want to hold the dollar. And whatever challenges the dollar is having at the moment as a result of the Trump presidency, that's not going to last forever either. So I think that's probably just a bit of bluster. Let me answer your other question by also tackling the previous question about the SCO, the idea of an SCO bank. Let's bear in mind that the whole multilateral development bank structure is pretty crowded at the moment. You already have a BRICS bank. It's called the New Development Bank, and it's based in Shanghai. That already exists, and it's already got members outside of the BRICS countries. You have the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, both of which China created right around the same time, 2013 to 2015, at the same time that the BRI was hatched in 2013. Those are now operational. They have been operational now, in the case of AIB, for a decade, similar to the NDB. That all said, I think the idea of forming an SCO bank is fanciful at this juncture. If the purpose is to promote BRICS currencies and similar options, well, I mean, the new development bank is already pretty much doing that. So I'm not sure why that is coming up as a topic of discussion. I mean, they have very ambitious targets already based on what was said in the last day or two. So I don't see how much of this is going to materialize. It seems like it's an idea that in the longer term might have some footing, but certainly doesn't seem like it's going to have any footing in the near term.
Indeed, I'd like to come across back to Professor Mahoney. Of course, we've seen in the meeting that has taken place yesterday between Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi that the economic aspect of the India-China ties is something that both countries are looking at moving forward. But there's a lot of question whether ties would go back to the pre-Galwan status quo. Could that happen? And could we see an even better future?
I think it's always risky to judge the present with the past and vice versa. But I think it's fair to say that bilateral ties are evolving with both countries reassessing their respective geostrategic positions and their prospects for the future. I think we all realize there are certainly historical issues on the border and the complicated relationship with Pakistan. But for me and the smart people with whom I get to discuss these topics here in China, including Indian diplomats, we've always foreseen an inevitable reconciliation, even if we have to get there via what the German philosopher Hegel long ago called the cunning of reason. But in short, I think the obvious benefits of good ties between the two countries so completely outweigh the cost and completely dwarf by comparison the problems that have stood in their way, that it's only a matter of time before we see a breakthrough, which we hope will be transformational for both countries, for Asia as a whole, and certainly with major implications for the rest of the world. Of course, this kind of development makes a lot of people in different corners quite nervous and itching to spoil, and maybe some of those were responsible for the problems we saw a couple of months ago on the Pakistani-Indian border, which was a month we anticipated a breakthrough. Nevertheless, I'm a big believer in the intelligence in both capitals. I'm a big believer in the civilizational resilience and confidence that we find in both nations. So I see them moving forward together one way or another.
All right, I request both guests to stay on with us because we're tracking some fresh developments from the SCO Summit. We are now learning that Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has stated that Belarus's participation in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization reflects the country's long-term strategic interests. Lukashenko added that Belarus is proud to have become a full member a year ago and has emphasized that membership in the SCO opens new prospects and broad areas of cooperation, describing it as a strategic choice that strengthens Belarus's role in regional and international affairs. I'd like to come back to Mr. Wagner. We've seen the fresh statement put out by Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus, and taking a bird's eye view for a moment of SCO as an organization at large. Its relevance has often been questioned over the years, especially because of differences between member states, especially India and China. However, there have been some key breakthroughs in the last couple of months, and also we've seen a strain in the Indo-US equation as well, with Trump enhancing tariffs. We've seen a thaw of ties between India and China after we've seen the border truce in October 2024, then Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi meeting in Kazan last year, now once again in Tianjin. So are we seeing this organization coming up as a counterweight to Western alliances, or is it still quite not there yet?
Well, as I was saying earlier, This is certainly something that is an ambition of Xi Jinping as the sort of epicenter of the SCO, China being. Uh, I think it's, in international relations, you don't have permanent allies, you have permanent interests. And in this case, India and China and the other countries are saying, well, okay, we know what's going on in America. We've got an opportunity here to perhaps build a counterweight type organization, but it's not broad enough in scope. It doesn't have sufficient numbers of significant players to be able to move the needle, I would say, in the opposite direction. So I think it's one of those things where it's in a transition, and either they're going to be successful in making this a forum for action as opposed to just talking, or it's going to remain primarily an organization for talking. So you can have all the great ambitions that you want. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to become reality.
I'd like to come back to Professor Mahoney. Speaking about India and China, coming back to the bilateral equation, why is normalization of ties with India now mattering to China? Do you think there is now an understanding between these two countries, which are the second and the fourth largest economies in the world, that Donald Trump's tariffs are now the #1 challenge that they need to tackle together, not just for the benefit of their own people, but for the benefit of the world at large?
Well, yeah, there are really sort of three issues to touch upon here. I think first, the SCO as an organization where dialogue takes place as opposed to, we see executive decision making. I think the dialogue part is important because it gives a framework for publicly showing improved relations. The SCO really began to change its footing and evolve after the United States penetrated Central Asia following 9/11. That's where we began to see a lot of coordination between Moscow and Beijing as they began to work to find security and development solutions that would push the Americans out of Central Asia. That presence really frustrating the security concerns in both countries. More recently, we have seen India building air bases in Central Asia. And I would have to assume that this is being done certainly with Moscow's blessing and even China's blessing. And I think because there's this understanding that by having the three regional major powers working together in Central Asia, it will help crowd out American efforts. We still see some American efforts to come back into Central Asia militarily. So I think that in this context, the SCO has been extraordinarily successful and is continuing to work in ways that or support these other efforts that are ongoing. Now, with regard to the first question you asked me, there's a very long list of reasons. But first and foremost, why the normalizations of ties with India matter to China, and in terms of bilateral ties, China understands that it's important to have good neighborly relations for peace and mutual development. China understands that conflicts that invite meddling from third powers like the U.S. That these are bad for everyone. China understands that the U.S. does not offer India real opportunities for economic growth or security, but that China and India can grow together and mitigate risks from Washington and others. Now, with multilateral ties, again, as I was pointing out, India is a major regional power, and it's important to see the regional powers of China, Russia, and India on the same page, as we see increasingly. Again, as I've described, the sort of the coordinated approaches to Central Asia, where all three countries are really trying to grow and build forward their economies and to provide security for that region with paradigms long asserting that security of Central Asia is key to the overall peace and development of Asia. Now, with regard to your point on Trump's tariffs, I think Trump's tariffs are just the sort of idiosyncratic manifestation of a panicking great power in rapid decline. The velvet glove of shared values shucked off once and for all to reveal the damnable fist within, to paraphrase Hobsbawm's famous paraphrase of Gramsci. In fact, I think India was already rethinking its position vis-a-vis the U.S. in 2023, perhaps sooner when it became clear that Biden's anti-China proposals were poison pills. They were always going to leave India bearing the greater costs and worse risks with no substantial offsets coming from the U.S. Indeed, I think India's hesitancy to embrace fully Biden's position in 2023. And we can go back and point to India canceling the high altitude, the plans for high altitude, I forget what that was, high altitude war drills with U.S. on the Indian border. We saw that India began to back away, and I do believe that Biden's foreign policy overall collapsed that year, which in part reopened the door to Trump. Furthermore, I think we can go back further in time and see there were prospects and optimism pre-Galwan for breakthroughs. Once again, were resisted by some, and which may have fed those unfortunate tragedies on the border. I'm not suggesting a conspiracy here. I'm simply saying that aside from a few unfortunate distractions, these two countries' long-term development and security trajectories have been moving closer together. And I think both realize that their future potential can only be met if they continue to do so. And these are realizations that probably preceded Trump 2.0, Biden, and even Trump 1.0. To be sure, it's probably fair to say that Trump's tariffs are helping move China-India ties forward, but I believe they were going to move forward regardless, sooner or later, although I think many of us wish it was much sooner, and certainly without Trump's encouragement.
All right. Also joining us on the broadcast now is Major General Sudhakarji. He's a senior geopolitical and strategic expert. He's joining us live from India. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. We're, of course, now discussing the thorn ties between India and China and its implications. Before I come across to you, I believe we are now getting audio. The audio clip of Prime Minister Modi speaking at the SCO Summit. Let's cut across.
As security, C, connectivity, O, opportunity. पहले स्तंभ S यानी सिक्योरिटी के संदर्भ में मैं कहना चाहता हूं कि सुरक्षा, शांति और स्थिरता किसी भी देश के विकास का आधार है। किंतु इस मार्ग में आतंकवाद, अलगाववाद और अतिवाद बड़ी चुनौतियां हैं। आतंकवाद सिर्फ किसी देश की सुरक्षा ही नहीं, बल्कि पूरी मानवता के लिए एक साझा चुनौती है। कोई देश, कोई समाज, कोई नागरिक अपने आप को इससे सुरक्षित नहीं समझ सकता। इसलिए आतंकवाद से लड़ाई में भारत ने एकजुटता पर बल दिया। इसमें एससीओ रेट्स की बहुत महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका रही। इस वर्ष भारत ने जॉइंट इंफॉर्मेशन ऑपरेशन को लीड करते हुए अल-कायदा और इससे जुड़े आतंकी संगठनों से लड़ने का इनिशिएटिव किया। हमने रेडिकलाइजेशन के विरुद्ध समन्वय बढ़ाने और मिलकर कदम उठाने का भी प्रस्ताव रखा। टेरर फाइनेंसिंग के खिलाफ आवाज उठाई। इसमें मेरे समर्थन के लिए मैं आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, भारत पिछले 4 दशकों से निर्मम आतंकवाद का दंश झेल रहा है। कितनी ही माताओं ने अपने बच्चे खोए और कितने बच्चे अनाथ हो गए। हाल ही में हमने पहलगाम में टेररिज्म का बहुत ही घिनौना रूप देखा। इस दुख की घड़ी में जो मित्र देश हमारे साथ खड़े रहे, मैं उनका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। यह हमला केवल भारत की अंतरात्मा पर भी आघात नहीं था, यह मानवता में विश्वास रखने वाले हर देश, हर व्यक्ति को खुली चुनौती थी। ऐसे में प्रश्न उठना स्वाभाविक है, क्या कुछ देशों द्वारा आतंकवाद का खुलेआम समर्थन हमें स्वीकार्य हो सकता है। एक्सेलेंसी, हमें स्पष्ट रूप से और एक स्वर में कहना होगा कि आतंकवाद पर कोई भी डबल स्टैंडर्ड स्वीकार्य नहीं होंगे। हमें मिलकर आतंकवाद का हर रंग में, हर रूप में विरोध करना होगा। ये मानवता के प्रति हमारा दायित्व है। एक्सेलेंसी, अब मैं दूसरे स्तंभ सी यानी कनेक्टिविटी पर अपने विचार रखना चाहूंगा। भारत का हमेशा से मत रहा है कि मजबूत कनेक्टिविटी से केवल व्यापार ही नहीं बल्कि विश्वास और विकास के द्वार भी खुलते हैं। इसी सोच के साथ हम चाबहार पोर्ट और इंटरनेशनल नॉर्थ साउथ ट्रांसपोर्ट कॉरिडोर जैसे इनिशिएटिव पर काम कर रहे हैं। इनसे हम अफगानिस्तान और मध्य एशिया के साथ संपर्क बढ़ा सकते हैं। हमारा मानना है कि कनेक्टिविटी के हर प्रयास में संप्रभुता और क्षेत्रीय अखंडता का सम्मान होना चाहिए। यही एससीओ चार्टर के मूल सिद्धांतों में भी विदित है। कनेक्टिविटी दैट bypasses sovereignty, losing trust and meaning. एक्सेलेंसी, तीसरा स्तंभ है ओ यानी अपॉर्चुनिटी। Opportunity for cooperation and reform। 2023 में भारत की अध्यक्षता के दौरान नई ऊर्जा और विचारों का संचार हुआ। स्टार्टअप और इनोवेशन, ट्रेडिशनल मेडिसिन, यूथ एम्पावरमेंट, डिजिटल इंक्लूजन और शेयर बुद्धिस्ट हेरिटेज जैसे नए विषयों को अपने सहयोग में जोड़ा। हमारा प्रयास था कि एससीओ को सरकारों के परे भी ले जाए। सामान्य मानवी, यंग साइंटिस्ट, स्कॉलर्स और स्टार्टअप को भी आपस में जोड़े। हमारे पीपल टू पीपल टाइम को दृढ़ता देने के लिए मैं आज एक और सुझाव रखना चाहूंगा। एससीओ के अंतर्गत एक सिविलाइजेशन डायलॉग फोरम बनाया जाए। इससे हम अपनी प्राचीन सभ्यताओं, कला, साहित्य और परंपराओं को वैश्विक मंच पर साझा कर सकते हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, आज भारत रिफॉर्म, परफॉर्म, ट्रांसफॉर्म के मूल मंत्र पर आगे बढ़ रहा है। कोविड हो या वैश्विक आर्थिक अस्थिरता, हमने हर चुनौती को अवसर में बदलने का प्रयास किया। हम लगातार वाइड रेंजिंग रिफॉर्म पर काम कर रहे हैं। इसे देश में विकास के साथ साथ अंतर्राष्ट्रीय सहयोग के लिए भी नए अवसर खुल रहे हैं। मैं आप सभी को भारत की विकास यात्रा से जुड़ने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, यह खुशी की बात है कि एससीओ भी समय के अनुरूप इवॉल्व हो रहा है। ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्राइम, ड्रग ट्रैफिकिंग और साइबर सिक्योरिटी जैसे समकालीन चुनौतियों से निपटने के लिए 4 नए केंद्र बनाए जा रहे हैं। हम इस रिफॉर्म ओरिएंटेड माइंडसेट का स्वागत करते हैं। वैश्विक संस्थानों में रिफॉर्म के लिए एससीओ सदस्य आपसी सहयोग बढ़ा सकते हैं। संयुक्त राष्ट्र की 80वीं वर्षगांठ के अवसर पर हम एकमत होकर यूएन रिफॉर्म का आह्वान कर सकते हैं। ग्लोबल साउथ की आकांक्षाओं को आउटडेटेड फ्रेमवर्क में कैद रखना भावी पीढ़ियों के प्रति घोर अन्याय है। नई पीढ़ी के बहुरंगी सपनों को हम पुराने जमाने की ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट स्क्रीन पर नहीं दिखा सकते। स्क्रीन बदलनी ही होगी। एससीओ मल्टीलेटरलिज्म और इंक्लूसिव वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर का मार्गदर्शक बन सकता है। मुझे खुशी है कि इस महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर आज एक स्टेटमेंट जारी किया जा रहा है। एक्सेलेंसी, हम सभी पार्टनर्स के साथ समन्वय और सहयोग के साथ आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। मैं एससीओ के अगले अध्यक्ष किर्गिस्तान के राष्ट्रपति और मेरे मित्र प्रेसिडेंट जपारोव को शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Was India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech at the leaders' meeting at the SCO Summit. He stated that India has played a positive role in the SCO. He's divided the acronym into three parts, stating that S stands for security, C stands for connectivity, and O stands for opportunity. He has stated and come out and stated very clearly that terrorism remains a big challenge. India seeks unity in its fight against terror, and India has constantly spoken against terror financing. He has spoken about the tragedy of the lives lost in the Pahalgam terror attack back on the 22nd of April. He stated that no double standards on terrorism can be accepted, and that SCO must play a big role in the fight against terror. He's also stated that terrorism is a big threat to peace, and the fight against terror is India's commitment. He's spoken about starting a civilizational dialogue forum and stating that SCO nations must promote their traditions and culture through the forum, and that the organization itself has been evolving over the years in order to ensure that the global south is represented. He stated that the SCO can in fact lead a multilateral world order and therefore improve the situation of the people who are living across the world. Meanwhile, as I introduced Major General Sudhakarji before, thank you so much for your patience. We've just heard the Indian Prime Minister speak out at the SCO Summit. Quite a pointed message that is being given to the countries over there, especially with regards to terror. We do know the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is attending. We also know that during the SCO Defence Ministers meeting that was held a while back, the declaration, the joint document that was signed, had no mention of the Pahalgam terror attack, the attack that killed 26 innocent people in Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir, which saw widespread condemnation from across the world. In fact, India's defense minister refused to sign that document when he was in China. Now, a pointed message by Prime Minister Modi. Do you think, considering the fact that China has been reaching out and we've been now seeing a slight improvement as far as economic ties are concerned, do you think China will take these points into consideration while drafting the joint document this year, especially considering the fact that it's 25 years of the organization's founding?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for getting me to your show. In fact, a little while back, I was in India News prior to the NewsX. My short answer to your question is yes. Why am I saying yes? Because there is a platform of convergence from where China, India, Russia are expected to respond to the global churn, the geopolitical churn. The platform of convergence, we are thankful to Donald Trump for having imposed arbitrary and impulsive meaningless, unjustifiable, irrational kind of tariffs in the 21st century. We are looking at, when you look at the Cold War 1.0 and Cold War 2.0, any citizen anywhere in the world is looking towards some semblance of rules-based international order, and who better than a superpower? A superpower resorts to uncivility, which they expect other countries to behave with some civility in our behavior and decorum. Well, I don't think this is the way. Lack of diplomatic skills at the highest level in the apex leadership. So therefore, I think all are in the same boat. And with the circumstances unfolding in the world order, primarily because of Donald Trump's the tariff tyranny, I think that is doing wonders. Second thing which is actually doing wonders is bringing all three important leaders together, is the commitment which the president made during the election campaign, and his inability to reach any of them or achieve any of them in the given stipulated time frame. That is the second. And third is the double talk, double standard of the Western alliances. So therefore, all these things put together, they actually are, galvanizing the countries in the Asia, and thereby highlighting or underscoring one point: this is the century, Asia century, and in Asia, which is the country which is the brightest spot, the silver spot, that is the India. So, having said this, a quick response to your point regarding the transborder terrorism. I think the Honorable Prime Minister of India has done well by emphasizing the point regarding the Pahalgam terror attack on 22nd April 2025, regardless what the world thinks. It is our country. We need to project our point. We need to assert the security and the safety of our citizens. I think he's done a commendable job by forcing his way through or articulating in a very emphatic manner. Now, the call has to be taken by China. If China wants to have a credible image, a reliable image as a growing global power, and in an emerging, evolving situation in the global order, pandemic, thereafter Russia-Ukraine war, it has not come to an end. Thereafter, the Hamas and the Israeli conflict, thereafter the Pahalgam attack, and in the backdrop of the rising or increasing price of fuel, fertilizer, and food world over, not only global south, the global north is also affected. So under these circumstances, if some semblance of stability, normalcy is expected, then I think Xi will miss the bus. He will miss the opportunity if he doesn't toe the lines of expectations and the aspiration of India, because it's the biggest, one of the biggest threat that the country is suffering. And it is not only India, it is the complete humankind or the mankind world over. India kept on making noise and kept on taking the matter about terrorism with a proposal of architecture to effectively contain and counter it way back in 96, 97 to United Nations Security Council. And since then, it has been gathering dust. Thank God 9/11 took place and America, like a superpower, they were besieged with the understanding which we are trying to make over the preceding 10 years or more than 10 years, that India was one of the countries which is worst affected. Let there be a common definition. Let there be a common architecture, a global war of terrorism based on which everyone should fight together with a common end and objective. That did not happen. So since it has not happened, I think it is a golden welcome opportunity which SCO is providing, mindful of the fact it is only a regional bloc. But the regional bloc is gradually assuming the status of a global bloc, thereby giving a chance to Xi, the President Xi of China, the chairperson of SCO this time, to actually capitalize and derive golden milestone out of it in his favor, in favor of the regional security and stability, in favor of the global peace, and he can put his best foot forward and extend towards the global arena to assert his authority and leadership.
All right, sir. I'd like to carry forward this conversation with Professor Mahoney, who is still with us who's also waited rather patiently listening to the Indian Prime Minister's speech as well. Coming back to the India-China bilateral equation, particularly the economic equation, we do know that there is a deficit on India's end, nearly 100 billion US dollars. Both countries now, after the thaw in ties, after the border truce, are looking at enhancing trade again. China is India's second largest trading partner. But the exchange of goods and services was impacted after the Galwan clash in 2020. However, now both countries have agreed to resume border trade through 3 points, Lipu Lake, Shipkila and Nathula. India is also eyeing access to Chinese rare earths and magnets, and all in all, the second and the fourth largest economy are now putting up a joint front against Trump's tariffs. Will China open its markets to Indian companies in order to reduce this deficit? Because that is one of India's main concerns. And what are the implications of this for the world economy at large?
Well, trade is a two-way street. I think there are a lot of opportunities for complementarity, lots of opportunities for the law of comparative advantages to work its magic. Some markets are rather sensitive in China, like pharmaceuticals. Given the fact that these are, at least in terms of basic medicines, these are largely state-owned companies that have, let's say, unhealthy relationships with hospitals, which depend on those relationships for funds. And so it's very difficult to sort of open that market in a way that doesn't create a lot of other problems downstream, politically and economically, for China. I do think that this can be resolved. I actually think there's an opening for this, and I've made proposals to both Indian diplomats and the government to that end. But the bottom line is I can foresee the two sides working through some trade deals, but it won't be easy. Of course, previously, India was unable to commit to RCEP, so we have to wonder to what extent the Indian economy is prepared for some sort of free trade agreement with China, despite the FTA progress we've just seen between the UK and India. But contrary to some of the earlier discussions on this channel that I was listening to this morning, and reinforced now by listening to the Prime Minister's speech, I suspect the primary focus here is on security. And I'm even optimistic that we might eventually see a strategic partnership, this rubric preferred by China, especially after both leaders in Tianjin said they're cooperation partners and not rivals. Security is the first priority, as President Xi has said on many occasions. He said that security is vital for economic development, and I think certainly this wisdom applies to China-India ties as the difficult lessons of experience attest. And here, I'd go back to my colleague's point. I mean, we have to recall that a lot of what he's referring to as terrorism, this was something that was instigated largely by the U.S. Working with the ISI in Pakistan in the 1970s to create trouble for Afghanistan. And we're still living in the long, dark shadow of that, with the Talibs that they created and the formation of Al-Qaeda that came in to support them. And we continue to see, I think, unfortunately, an Indian government that has played the game of exploiting the U.S. versus China and wearing out its welcome in Washington, only to find the door open again in Beijing, and then vice versa. But I think I think certainly the Chinese side sees that this is a dead end and is not going to abandon Pakistan. But I do think that China will be useful for playing an instrumental role in finding some sort of reconciliation for the region, if not between India and Pakistan. Nevertheless, I think we will see some early returns related to improved trade as this meeting moves forward, as both countries are keen to address these concerns given headwinds from Washington. But above all, I think their primary concern is security, not only on their own borders, but throughout the region.
Speaking of security and Washington, I'd like to rope in Major General Sudhakar into the discussion once again. Now, despite its differences with China on the border, something that both countries are looking to address, India has now practically reset ties in a way. India is a member also of the Quad grouping. What's interesting is that there are reports coming in from American publications such as the New York Times that Trump might not make it to the Quad summit that India is going to be hosting later this year. We've seen statements come in from Japan and Australia in the meanwhile, reinforcing their support for this grouping. So how does it augur for ties bilaterally between India and the US, as well as the larger Indo-Pacific security framework in the long run?
Excellent. Pia, must compliment you for a very, very relevant and important question you have asked. Two issues you have raised. One is the bilateral relations between India and US, and second is about the efficacy or sustainability of the very institutional framework of Quad. The first and foremost thing is Indo-US. Let me very briefly put across. Little while back in your channel only, I said India and the US have had a very regressive or a period of estrangement prior to 2000. Post 2000, there has been a period of engagement. By and by, there are institutional legacies which have been actually established. No matter what happens in top, because of personality-driven idiosyncrasies, the institutions will continue to operate. Had it not been so, we wouldn't have had our group captain Shukla going to the satellite station and coming back. And we wouldn't have had the Nisar I think jointly, it is a joint venture between India and NASA, the ISRO and NASA. Nisar is a satellite which has been launched few days back only. Had it not been so, you wouldn't have been seeing in the media that India has gone in for signing a big contract with the aerospace engine, GE, to get the engines for our Tejas aircraft. Had it not been so, the joint training wouldn't have been going on. So there are many activities which are going on by virtue of the fact of institutional linkages which have been established and a number of host of agreements which have been signed. Part of them are bipartisan, part of them are vulnerable to being muted or being modified from time to time, but majority of them are actually long-lasting and based on the paradigm of one concept, that is the necessity of Indo-Pacific. So if one president comes for 4 years, by virtue of transactional requirements and parameters or need of the hour, as per his perception and understanding, and by the political weightages, if he changes, there is something documented in black and white and going on for past several years. It cannot be changed. The bipartisan doctrine of US is that I may not be reproducing the words or the language in the same form for lack of correct expression. The China continues to remain the number one threat. And therefore, the architecture of the global security has to be based on a paradigm of Indo-Pacific. And in that, coming to the second point, is the Indo-Pacific, the Quad. We need to understand, Pia, as to the genesis of Quad. How did and why did Quad come into existence? Take your mind back to 2004 tsunami, wherein the territorial, I would say, the rim countries of Indian Ocean region, they were the worst affected, and India played a very important role in that, in rescue operations. And consequent to which, there was some consultation between Australian leadership and the Japanese leadership, and may his soul rest in peace, Mr. Abe of Japan, Japanese Prime Minister, during his visit to India in 2007, he proposed, as a consequence of the need-driven disaster management rescue operations, why not we actually get the countries, like-minded countries together and form a grouping wherein we should be able to extend as fast or quickest responders to such kind of disasters so that lots of human lives and the properties and assets can be prevented from suffering or succumbing to the disaster. So that was the start point. If that is the start point, well, it has taken a connotation. Now it is a kind of a economic grouping of the alliance. Military alliance is not being talked about. Well, it cannot be denied in times ahead. If that be the kind of a requirement, it includes your technology, critical technology. It includes your vaccines in case of pandemic. It includes your connectivity project, infrastructure, weather, and a host of other activities, economy. So therefore, at the moment, I think we would do well to continue with the same. And coming to the point that you raised, whether Donald Trump comes or not, well, it is the call, it is the leadership. Since Donald Trump had revived the very concept of Quad, which had gone into a hibernation or dormant phase of its growth between 2007 to 2017, Donald Trump only he revived. It is only his assertion that this needs to be revived. The Quad came into preeminence, its erstwhile existential status in 2017. If he doesn't come, well, he has to think it over. He needs to introspect that is USA looking at the long-term perspective threats and the challenges for the world order. Does it wish to continue as a superpower or whatever you call it, declining superpower, or it would like to abandon and raise its hand and let China come in? So these are the moot questions which have to be answered by. Therefore, my take is, notwithstanding the report given in New York Times, I still feel till the last day, given the mindful of the fact the transactional kind of approach and response of Donald Trump, I still feel that it will be in prudence and it will be beneficial to one and all that the USA president makes it to India, comes and attends this particular thing. And in any case, it is not a military alliance. It is an alliance of the disaster management, the economy, the pandemic issues, and such like issues. And I think it will do good if he reconsiders his options and attends the meeting scheduled the later part of the year.
All right, sir, I'd like to thank you. I'd also like to thank Professor Mahoney for taking out time, sitting with us on NewsX World as we track all of these developments from Tianjin in China. We will continue our coverage of the SCO Summit. More news and updates on the other side as we slip into a quick short break.